I've been asked what I said when my daughter called me from the probate attorney's office. People want the speech, the confrontation, the moment where everything gets said out loud and the person who did the wrong thing finally has to hear it. I understand the appeal. I do. But that is not the story. That's not how any of this went. What I said to my daughter when she called me on that Wednesday morning was 4 words: calm, direct, and entirely sufficient. And those 4 words did nothing, compared to what my mother had already done the morning before at 9:14 a.m. in a phone call that lasted 11 minutes and rearranged everything before I even knew it needed rearranging. My name is James Hadley. I am 58 years old. I spent 31 years working as a federal contracts analyst with General Services Administration, most of it out of the Charlotte Field office on South Tryon Street, and I retired 14 months ago with a pension, a parking permit I forgot to turn in, and the specific quiet of a man who has spent 3 decades reviewing other people's paperwork and is finally genuinely done. I coach youth flag football on Saturday mornings now, a recreational league for 8 and 9-year-olds who are mostly interested in the juice boxes at halftime, which I respect. I grow tomatoes badly in my backyard. I am working on this. I drive a 2011 Honda Pilot Silver, 219,000 miles, purchased used 12 years ago and maintained personally because I know how engines work, and I have never once paid someone else to do something I could do in my own driveway. I am not a complicated man. I never needed to be. Now, let me tell you about my mother. Her name is Frances Hadley. She turned 77 in February. She lives in a house on Archdale Drive in South Charlotte that she and my father bought in 1979, when the neighborhood was new and the oak trees in the front yards were still young enough that you could see over them. The house is a single-story brick ranch with black shutters, a screened back porch that she has used every morning the weather allows since 1981, and a kitchen garden along the south fence that she has tended for 45 years without once losing a growing season. Not to weather, not to illness, not to grief. My father passed 8 years ago, a Tuesday in March, and Frances handled it the way she handled everything she encountered in her life. Quietly, completely, without asking anyone to carry what she was capable of carrying herself. She kept the garden going. She kept the Sunday dinners going. She drove herself to every appointment for 8 years without once asking me to take her unless I offered, and even then she often declined. She paid her own bills. She kept her own calendar. She called me on Wednesday evenings to ask whether I was eating enough vegetables, which she has done since I left for college in 1985, and which I fully expect her to do until one of us is no longer able to answer phone. She is precise. That is the word I reach for when I try to describe Frances Hadley to someone who hasn't met her. Not cold. She is one of the warmest people I know. Not rigid. She adapts. She listens. She changes her mind when the evidence warrants it. But precise. The way a good instrument is precise. She chooses her words with care. She keeps every commitment she makes. She notices everything and comments only on what is necessary. When she tells you something, it's because it's true and because it matters. When she doesn't tell you something, it's because she has decided, for reasons of her own, that the moment isn't right yet. I have spent 58 years around this woman. I have never once caught her saying anything she did not mean, and I have never once caught her failing to say something she had decided needed saying. She just waited until the time was exactly right. I want you to hold that. My daughter's name is Kristen. She's 33. She lives in Ballantyne, 14 minutes from Archdale Drive. She works in healthcare administration, which she is good at. She is organized, efficient, capable in a crisis. She has her mother's ability to assess a situation quickly and her mother's tendency, at times, to assess it faster than the full picture warrants. She married a man named Trey 6 years ago. I have always liked Trey. He is pleasant and smart and genuinely fond of Kristen, which is the most important thing. He has never been particularly close to Frances, which was not anyone's fault exactly, just the nature of the distance between a young professional man and an elderly woman he sees at holidays. I mention him because he matters to what happens on a Saturday night in October, and because the way he says things matters, and because there is a particular kind of casual cruelty that is not cruelty at all in the mind of the person committing it. It is simply not thinking, which is its own kind of problem. Frances's surgery was a right shoulder replacement, rotator cuff deterioration that had been accumulating for years, past the threshold where any amount of cortisone and careful movement could compensate for what was simply gone. Her orthopedic surgeon was Dr. Nadine Park at Novin Health on Carmel Road, a compact, direct woman with a manner so precisely calibrated to delivering difficult information without alarm that I immediately understood why Frances had chosen her. They were similar that way. Frances respected Dr. Park. That was apparent in every appointment I attended with her, which was 3. She respected Dr. Park's assessments, asked specific questions, received specific answers, and made her decisions accordingly. She did not negotiate or minimize or ask for second opinions she didn't need. She agreed to surgery in August when Dr. Park told her the joint had deteriorated past the point of managing, and she set a procedure date without drama. Surgery was Wednesday, October 8th. I was in the waiting room at Novin Health by 6:45 in the morning with a cup of coffee from the machine near the elevator and a paperback I did not read. Dr. Park found me at 1:53 in the afternoon. She said the procedure had gone cleanly, that Frances's bone density had been exactly what the pre-surgical imaging had suggested, that the replacement was well-seated and should integrate without complication. She said Frances would need appropriate post-operative physical therapy. She said it that way, appropriate, meaning the correct amount, meaning the amount that is not optional, and that with proper adherence she should expect full restoration function within 4 to 6 months. She looked at me when she said all of that. I told her Frances would adhere. Dr. Park said, I believe that. Frances spent one night in the hospital. I was there both days. She was in good spirits, which for Frances meant she was alert, wry, and mildly critical of the hospital food, all of which I took as excellent signs. She asked one of the night nurses about the specific composition of the shoulder prosthetic, which the nurse was unable to answer, and which Frances accepted with the grace of a woman who has long since stopped expecting the world to have every answer she wants. I brought her home to Archdale Drive on Saturday, October 11th, 3 days after surgery. She walked in on her own. I had stocked a refrigerator, labeled the medications, and arranged them in order on the counter, printed Dr. Park's discharge instructions, and put them in a manila folder on the kitchen table, and set up the bathroom grab bar the discharge nurse had recommended. Frances surveyed all of this from the kitchen doorway. Then she said, James, you didn't have to do all this. I said, I know. She said, thank you. She sat down at the table, poured herself a glass of water I'd left there, and picked up the folder. Kristen had offered to come Saturday evening. She'd texted me Thursday morning while Frances was still in the hospital. Dad, we'll come Saturday after we drop Trey's parents at the airport, probably around 7. I told Frances. Frances said, good. Tell her not to bring anything. We have plenty. Kristen and Trey arrived at 7:22 p.m. I was washing up in the kitchen. Frances was in the living room in her good chair with her arm in the surgical sling, watching the news with the sound at about half volume. It was a comfortable chair, one she'd had for over 20 years, positioned so she could see both the television and the front window. She knew when people arrived before they rang the bell. Kristen came in and hugged me in the kitchen first, which she always did. Then she went to the living room. I heard her voice go up slightly the way it does when she's making effort, warm and bright, and doing the work of the conversation. I heard Frances respond, lower and steadier, and I heard them talk for 20 minutes or so while I made coffee, and Trey stood in the kitchen with me and asked about the Flag Football League, which he remembered I had mentioned at Thanksgiving. He was easy to be around. We talked about the kids on the team and about the neighborhood, and about a restaurant he'd heard had opened on Park Road. Easy conversation. The kind that fills a kitchen pleasantly and means nothing much either way. Kristen came in at about 20 to 9. They had a drive back to Ballantyne. She hugged me again, said she'd come by Tuesday, said it easily and without hesitation, which I noted and which I did not examine. I walked them to the door. Frances had closed her eyes in her chair. I assumed she was asleep. Dr. Park's team had told me the first few days post-surgery would involve a lot of sleeping, that the body was using the rest to do its work, and that this was correct and expected. I locked the front door, turned the porch light on, went back to the kitchen, and washed the mugs. Through the window over the sink, I could see the backyard, the kitchen garden along the fence, cleaned up for fall. The screen porch in the dark. I dried my hands and went to the guest room. What I did not know was that Frances had not been asleep. She had closed her eyes because she was tired and because the news had moved on to things she didn't need to see before bed. But she was not asleep. She was sitting in her chair with her eyes closed and her arm in the sling, and she was resting, which is not the same thing. And the living room where she sat shared a wall with the narrow hallway that ran between the front door and the kitchen. The door to that hallway had been open. It was always open. Frances had kept that door open for 45 years because she ran a house without hidden compartments, and she saw no reason to start now. She heard them moving toward the kitchen. She heard Trey's voice first. Not trying to be quiet, not trying to be heard, just talking the way a man talks when he believes a conversation is private. She seemed okay. Then Kristen, matter of fact, the tone of someone completing an assessment on a mental checklist. Not unkind, not performative, just conclusive. She's fine. She's not that sick. 5 words, 3 of them doing the work. Not that sick. Delivered 14 minutes after her grandmother had walked into her own house for the first time since surgery, with a new shoulder and a sling and a folder of recovery instructions, without asking for anything, without performing anything, without once indicating a degree to which the previous 3 days had taken out of a 77-year-old body that was also, at that same moment, mending itself from the inside out. Frances heard all 5 words. She stayed still. She did not react, did not shift in the chair, did not make a sound. She heard the mugs being washed. She heard Trey say something else she didn't catch. She heard the front door, the porch light click, my footsteps to the guest room. She sat in the dark with her arm in the sling, and she thought about what she had heard, the way a precise woman thinks about precise things, methodically, without rushing, arriving in her own time at a decision. I did not know any of this when I woke up Sunday morning. I was up at 6:45. Made coffee in the kitchen. Frances was already at the table in her robe, her reading glasses on the tabletop beside her, the Charlotte Observer open in front of her, holding at the angle that let her read it without moving her shoulder. She had come downstairs on her own. I did not ask how long she'd been up. She would have found the question unnecessary. I put a mug in front of her and sat down across the table. We drank our coffee. She turned a page of the paper. I looked out the kitchen window at the garden. After a while, she folded the paper, set it to one side. She did not put her glasses on. She looked at me across the table. "James," she said, "I'd like Roger Ashby's number." Roger Ashby, her attorney. He'd handled my father's estate with the kind of thoroughness that Frances had noticed and filed away. She'd worked with him twice since then. His number had been in my phone for years. I looked at her. I kept my voice easy. "Is everything all right?" She gave me the particular look she reserved for a question she found beside the point. "Everything is fine," she said. "I've been meaning to update a few things. This seems like the right time." She said it simply, without emphasis, the way she said everything that had already been decided. There was no opening in it, no invitation to discuss or redirect. Just, "This is what I'm doing. This is when I'm doing it." I have had 58 years to learn the difference between Frances Hadley saying everything is fine and meaning it, and Frances Hadley saying everything is fine and meaning. I have all the information I need, and I've made my decision, and your role right now is to give me the phone number I asked for. This was the second one. I recognize it without difficulty. I gave her Roger Ashby's number. She called him at 9:14 Sunday morning, from the kitchen table, while I was in the backyard checking on the garden. The call lasted 11 minutes. I came in from the yard, and she was just setting the phone down, folding her hands, picking up her coffee. She looked up. "Monday at 2, she said. "He can see me then." I said, "I'll drive you." She said, "I know you will." That was all. I want to be precise about what I knew and when I knew it. On Sunday morning, I knew my mother had made a phone call to her attorney within 24 hours of coming home from the hospital. I did not yet know what she had heard on Saturday night. I did not ask. I understood that she had her reasons, and that she would tell me what I needed to know when she judged I needed to know it. That is how she had always operated, and it was not my place to change it because I was curious. What I did was this. I stayed for lunch. I checked her medications and made sure she had taken the morning doses correctly. I helped her with the first round of the shoulder exercises Dr. Park's team had demonstrated before discharge, gently and carefully, watching her face for any indication that something was wrong. There was none. She moved through the exercises with the steady compliance of a woman who had been given a protocol and intended to follow it. When I left in the early afternoon, she walked me to the door, which she didn't need to do and which she did anyway. "Drive safe," she said. "Always do, Mom." She nodded. Monday at 2. I drove home on South Boulevard, and I let the drive be what it was. If you have been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it, and drop your thoughts and comments. Sunday evening, I sat on my own back porch with a cup of coffee until it went cold. The October night came in earlier than you expected to in Charlotte. One of those evenings where the afternoon had been warm enough to fool you, and then the temperature dropped 15 degrees between 5 and 7. I sat with my jacket on, and I thought about Frances at her kitchen table that morning. The folded newspaper, the reading glasses on the table, the way she'd said Roger Ashby's number with the same register she used for everything. Calm, direct, decided. I turned over what I knew. Something had happened between Saturday night and Sunday morning. She had heard something or seen something or understood something she hadn't understood before, and she had made a decision, not impulsively. Frances did nothing impulsively, with complete clarity, after a sufficient period of sitting still and thinking it through. I had watched her do that my whole life. I knew exactly what it looked like. I went inside at 8, made dinner, went to bed at 10. I was in the driveway at 1:15 Monday afternoon. Part 2, Acts 5 to 7. Roger Ashby's office was on East Moorhead Street, third floor of a building that had been a bank branch in a previous life and still had the particular solidity of a place built to hold things. The directory in the lobby was the old brass kind with white plastic letters pressed in by hand. Ashby and Associates. Third floor. The elevator was slow, and the hallway carpet had been there a long time, and none of it suggested anything other than a man who had been doing the same work in the same place for many years and saw no reason to change what was working. Roger Ashby was 62, measured, with the particular attentiveness of an attorney who understood that the people who sat across his desk were almost always in the middle of something difficult, and that the best thing he could offer them was his full attention and an absence of hurry. He had handled my father's death with thoroughness that Frances had noted precisely at the time and never forgotten. He shook her hand when we came in, then mine. He offered her the chair across from his desk and waited until she was settled before sitting down himself. I took the chair by the wall. Witness, not participant. I had learned this, slowly, over many years. He looked at her. "Frances, it's good to see you, though I'm sorry for the circumstances that bring you in." She adjusted her sling on the armrest. "I appreciate that, Roger, but I'm feeling well." She looked at him steadily. "I've been meaning to do this for some time." What happened this week clarified the timing. He opened a yellow legal pad and uncapped his pen. "Tell me what you'd like to do." She spoke for 37 minutes. I have said I won't reproduce all of it, because it was hers, and I mean that, but I will give you its full shape. She began with the house on Archdale Drive. She and my father had paid it off in 2006, 2 years before he retired, and 6 years before he passed. It was hers outright, free and clear, has been for 19 years. She spoke about it with the particular matter-of-factness of a woman who has maintained a property for 45 years and knows its value down to the last replaced water heater and refinished floor. She told Roger what she wanted done with it and who she wanted to have it. Then she spoke about the accounts. My father had built steadily over 30 years at the textile firm where he worked, and Frances had managed what he left with the same precision she'd managed everything else. Conservative, diversified, reviewed quarterly, not touched unnecessarily. The accounts had grown. She knew the current balances. She named them to Roger with the same ease she named the contents of her pantry. She told him how she wanted them distributed and to whom. She talked about specific items. A pearl necklace her mother had given her on her wedding day. My father's watch, a Seiko he'd worn every day for 22 years and which still kept perfect time. A set of small watercolors she received as a girl 12 from a teacher who'd recognized something in her, which she framed and hung in the hallway of every house she'd ever lived in. She told Roger where each of these things should go, and she spoke about the Humane Society of Charlotte on Queens Road, where she had volunteered every other Saturday for 9 years, working intake and never missing a shift except twice when the weather had been genuinely impossible. She wanted $17,400 directed there. She named the number without explanation. Roger wrote it down and looked up. "May I ask the significance of that amount?" he said. She looked at him calmly. 9 years, she said. About 43 Saturdays per year. Call it $4 a Saturday. She paused. I rounded up. Roger Ashby looked at her for a moment. Then he wrote something on his legal pad that was probably just a number, but I prefer to think was the sentence she just delivered, because it was the kind of sentence that deserves to be written down. He spent the next several minutes confirming details and asking clarifying questions, the kind that a careful attorney asks to ensure that what he writes into a legal document reflects exactly and precisely what the person across from him intends. He did not ask whether she was certain. He did not raise his eyebrows at the scope of what she was changing. He asked where she wanted the notifications to go, and when she told him and how, he made notes. He asked whether she wanted anything withheld from any party. She told him. He wrote it down. When they were done, he set his pen on the legal pad and looked at her. "Frances, I want to make sure I fully understood the scope of what you've described. These are significant changes from the existing documents." She met his eyes. "I know exactly what I described. Roger." He nodded once. "I'll have drafts to you by Thursday. I'd like you to review them without rushing, and call me if anything needs adjustment before you sign. Once signed, I'll file by end of week and begin standard certified notification through my office." She said, "How does the notification go out?" "Certified mail," he said, "to all named parties and to any institutions involved. Directly from my office." He paused. "Nothing goes out from you directly." She nodded. "That's exactly right." On the drive home, she looked out at the East Moorhead storefronts coming past in the late afternoon light. The coffee shop. The small insurance office with the neon sign still on from the previous tenant. The florist on the corner that had been there since before I was in high school. She was quiet for a long while. Long enough that I thought she was done, and I was going to let her be. Then she said, "James." "Yeah, Mom." "I heard what Kristen said Saturday night." I kept both hands on the wheel. The light ahead was green. I drove through it. She continued in the same unhurried register she used for everything that had already been decided. She didn't mean to be unkind. Frances said, "I believe that." She looked out the window. "But I have kept this house for 45 years. I kept it when your father and I had nothing extra. I kept it when he was sick and I was working, and the garden was the only thing that stayed the same from one week to the next. I kept it when he passed, and I kept it after, and I have sat on that porch every morning that the weather allowed for 44 years. She paused. "What I am is 77 years old, and 3 days out of surgery. What I am not is someone who doesn't warrant the full attention of the people in her house." She turned and looked at me. "I'm not angry, James. I'm just accurate." "I know," I said. She looked back out the window. "I know you do," she said. "You always have." I drove us the rest of the way to Archdale Drive, got her inside, made tea, stayed through the early evening. At the door, I put my hand on her good shoulder for a moment. She patted my arm twice, the way she always had. I drove home on South Boulevard, and the October dark came in early, and the whole drive I didn't feel angry or vindicated, or anything that required a name. I felt the particular quiet of a man who has watched something happen correctly. Frances's physical therapy began Thursday of that week. Her therapist was a woman named Carla Webb, assigned through Dr. Park's outpatient network, who came to Archdale Drive twice a week for the first 3 weeks before transitioning Frances to the Novant facility on Carmel Road for the remainder of the program. Carla was brisk and precise, and entirely without tolerance for the kind of patient who does 7 of the 10 prescribed repetitions and considers that close enough. Frances liked her immediately. They were well matched that way. I drove Frances to every outpatient appointment. 10 sessions in total, Mondays and Thursdays at 10 a.m., and I waited in the lobby with a book I mostly read and coffee. I mostly drank, and the specific contentment of a man was somewhere correct to be. The revised documents arrived from Roger Ashby on Thursday by courier, as he'd promised. A thick envelope. Frances read every page at the kitchen table, with her reading glasses on and a pencil in her good hand. 19 minutes. She made 3 small notations in the margins, called Roger's direct line, confirmed 2 needed minor adjustments and 1 did not. He incorporated them that afternoon. She signed Friday morning when the final drafts arrived. Roger filed by 3 p.m. Standard certified notifications went out the following week through his office, through the mail, as a matter of routine legal procedure. Kristen called me on a Wednesday, 11:38 in the morning. I was in the driveway under the hood of the Pilot. The serpentine belt had been making a sound I didn't like, which turned out to be exactly what I thought it was, which is a satisfying thing about knowing what you're doing. I heard the phone from the garage and came out to get it. Dad. Her voice had the lower, tighter register that I recognized as a different Kristen than the one who arrived at the door with a casserole dish and a hug. Careful, controlled, working to stay even. Dad. I received a letter from Roger Ashby's office. I know, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Did you know about this? Before it happened? She made her own decision, I said, with her own attorney, in her own time. I drove her to the appointment. That's the extent of it. Dad, her voice shifted, just slightly. Was this because of what I said that night at the house? I looked at the Pilot. I looked at the oak tree at the end of my driveway, dropping leaves onto the pavement in the October wind. I looked at nothing in particular. What did you say that night, Kristen? I asked. A long silence, longer than felt comfortable. The kind of silence that means a person on the other end is sitting with something they already knew and were hoping not to have confirmed. She heard me. Kristen said finally, it wasn't a question. The way she said it was the way you say something when you've already done the accounting. Your grandmother, I said, has lived in that house for 45 years. She ran it when there was no money to spare. She ran it when your grandfather was sick. She ran it alone for the last 8 years without complaint and without asking anyone for anything she didn't genuinely need. I paused. She hears everything. She always has. Dad, I didn't mean it to sound like... I know, I said, and I believe that. I do. But she was 3 days out of surgery, in her own house, through a door she left open because she has never had anything to hide. And what she heard was that she wasn't that sick. The line was quiet. I let it be quiet. Then Kristen said, her voice lower, can I call her? You can do more than call her, I said. She's on Archdale Drive. Carla Webb's PT appointment is Monday at 10, which means she'll be home by noon. You know where your grandmother keeps the spare key. I'm sorry, Dad. I know you are, I said. Tell her that. Not me. She's the one who heard it. I hung up and went back to the Pilot. Finished the belt. Ran the engine for 3 minutes. Confirmed everything sounded right. Washed my hands at the utility sink in the garage. Made a cup of coffee and took it to the back porch. The afternoon had done what October does in Charlotte. Warm enough at noon to mistake for September. Cool enough by 3 to remind you that something was ending. The kitchen garden at my place was a mess, and the one on Archdale Drive was immaculate, which said everything that needed saying about the difference between Frances Hadley and her son. The leaves were coming off the oak tree in the front. A neighbor's dog barked twice down the block and went quiet. Something in me went very still. Not satisfaction, not the heat of being right, just stillness. The kind that settles over a man when a thing has resolved itself correctly and he didn't have to raise his voice to make it happen. My mother had been in that house since 1979. She had built something over 77 years. Not money, not property, though those things are part of it, but life, a consistent, quiet, unannounced showing up for my father, for me, for every person she had ever said she would be there for. She got to decide where all of that went. She made her decision at 9 in the morning 4 days after surgery with a clear mind and a lifetime of careful observation. And she did it in 11 minutes on a Sunday, and she did not ask my permission, and she never needed to. I stayed on the porch until my coffee was gone. I want to tell you how things stand now, because the ending of a story matters as much as anything that comes before it. Frances finished physical therapy with Carla Webb in December, 6 weeks after they started. Dr. Park cleared her for full activity the second week of January, which Frances had been expecting since November based on her own assessment of her progress, which was accurate, as her assessments always were. She is back in the kitchen garden. The screen porch is open again on warm afternoons. Sunday dinners are back to their usual shape. The house on Archdale Drive, the table set properly, the specific smell of whatever Frances has had on the stove since noon. Kristen came to Archdale Drive the Saturday after the certified letter arrived. She came alone. Frances called me that evening. She said, "Kristen came today." I said, "How is it?" A brief pause. She said, "Honest." I said, "Good." She said, "It's the only way things actually get better, James." Then she told me I needed to rake the leaves in my driveway before they became a hazard, which was accurate, and we said goodnight. I don't know everything that was said in that house on a Saturday afternoon. I was not there. What I know is that Frances was gracious because she is always gracious, and honest because she is always honest, and that whatever she said to my daughter was delivered the same way she delivered everything, without performance, without bitterness, without any need to be seen being right. She didn't need any of that. She'd already done the necessary thing on a Sunday morning before I came in from the garden. The estate documents stand as filed. They are Frances's to revisit if and when she chooses, and that is entirely her business. What she built over 77 years is hers to dispose of as she sees fit, and she looked at the evidence available to her and made a precise and considered decision, and I think she was right. She is almost always right. She has been almost always right for as long as I have been alive and paying attention. What I know, sitting here now, is this. Some women do not argue. They absorb what they have heard, and they sit with it overnight, and they wake up in the morning, and they make a phone call, and they do what needs to be done with complete composure and without asking anyone's permission. That is not coldness. That is not bitterness. That is a particular precision of a woman who has kept her own counsel for 77 years and knows exactly what to do with information when she receives it. And if you are in the habit of saying things through open doors in her house, in the easy, confident voice of a person who believes a person in the next room is asleep, you should understand something. She is not asleep. She is never asleep. She is sitting in her chair with her eyes closed, and she is listening, and she is filing, and she already knows exactly what she's going to do in the morning. My mother's reading glasses on the windowsill, a screen porch in October light, and 11 minutes on a Sunday morning that changed everything before I had finished my first cup of coffee. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more real, raw, and family stories. I will see you on the next one.